The setting for Daniel chapter 2 is the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. So in this chapter, we read about Nebuchadnezzar having a dream, but he forgot what the dream was. All he remembered was that the dream troubled him. So he called for his magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to shew the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. That's the end of verse 2. And the king, without having to read everything in Daniel chapter 2, the king basically explained to these wise men, these magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans, that he had had a dream and that the dream troubled him. And he basically wanted them to tell him what the dream was and also give him the interpretation. But then these astrologers, Chaldeans, and sorcerers explained that the king had to explain to them what the dream was, so that they could then interpret it for him. He explained that he couldn't remember the dream. So he demanded, basically Nebuchadnezzar demanded that they tell him what the dream was, and then give him the interpretation as well. But these astrologers and sorcerers explained that there's no one had ever asked for such a thing. What the king should do is tell them what the dream was, and then they would give him the interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar actually got angry with them and accused them of trying to buy time and trying to get him to tell them what the dream was, so that they could just make up some explanation of their own, which didn't align with the dream that he'd had. And we can tell from reading, in the book of Daniel, specifically chapter 2 that I'm talking about today, is that kings those days were different from the kings that we have nowadays. They were real kings. They had power. Not like the puppets that we have nowadays, who are being told what to do by someone else. You can clearly see by reading the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar was a real king and he had power. And basically why I'm saying that is because he threatened the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans and these wise men that he was going to destroy them and make their houses a dunghill. That's verse 5, end of verse 5. So when the Chaldeans failed to tell Nebuchadnezzar what the dream was that he had, he basically sent them away with this threat of death hanging over them. And messengers were sent to Daniel and to his friends to say that their lives were also had been threatened by the king because of this thing. But obviously Daniel wasn't there when the astrologers and the Chaldeans and the sorcerers were called, because it says here that Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, had been sent to Daniel to tell him that the king had commanded that to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. That's verse 12, end of verse 12. It says here that Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's guard, "Why is the decree so hasty from the king?" Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time. So Daniel went into the king and asked for more time. And the king, Nebuchadnezzar, granted Daniel and his friends time so that they could pray and hopefully, get an answer from God. And that did happen. Verse 17 says that Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning the secret, that Daniel and his fellows should perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So later on, Daniel was shown, had the same dream that Nebuchadnezzar had been shown by God, and obviously he was given interpretation as well. So Daniel went to Verse 24, therefore Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. So you see, Daniel was a really nice guy. You have to bear in mind that Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those were their Jewish names, but they had been given Babylonian names because the same as what used to happen here in Africa when the Europeans came to colonize Africa, they gave the blacks European names um, as a way of saying basically that they had been conquered. Uh, so. Um, I was just reading verse 24. It says, therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. I was just explaining, basically, I kind of forgot, lost my train of thought that Daniel was a nice guy because he was a foreigner in Babylon and yet he had such a great position. But when God gave him the dream and the interpretation, and obviously he knew that this would basically not only save his life and the lives of his three friends, but he was also concerned about all the wise men and the astrologers and the sorcerers. Even though Daniel was Jewish and he knew that these sorcerers and astrologers were practicing a false religion, he still was concerned for them and wanted them to be saved as well. Because he says here to Arioch, destroy not the wise men of Babylon, bring me in before the king, and I will shew unto the king the interpretation. And I find verse 25 interesting because it says, then Arioch, remember Arioch is the captain of the king's guard. Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. Now, obviously, Arioch told a lie. He didn't find Daniel. Daniel went to him so that Arioch could take him to the king. This is I even wrote in my Bible there on that verse, on verse just next to verse 25, that Arioch was sucking up to the king. Maybe he wanted the king to give him a position, a higher position than he already had. Um, so when the king said to Daniel, are you able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and interpretation thereof? Daniel answered, this is verse 27, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers shew unto the king. He wanted the king to know that these sorcerers, the magicians, the wise men, they were all false. They had been deceiving the king. Perhaps, I mean, we can read between the lines that these wise men, the sorcerers, the astrologers, and the Chaldeans, had been called upon before this incident by the king, and perhaps had been asked to explain to the king certain things, and obviously they just come up with some explanation, and that's why the king got angry with them when he asked them to tell him what the dream was that he had, and also to give him the interpretation. I think because before they'd actually misled him. So verse 28, but there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. So just before I go on, like once again I said, Daniel was trying to make Nebuchadnezzar aware that there's only one true God and that God was in heaven, and not to follow the false teachings of the astrologers and these magicians, the Chaldeans and the wise men. And he basically explained that the dream that he had, just verse 30, at the beginning of verse 30 says, but as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for the sakes that shall but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. So just before I go on, I wanted to actually mention at the very beginning of the video that yes, God does communicate with us through dreams, but sometimes what happens is there's a verse in Ecclesiastes 5 verse 3 that says the uh, dreams come through the multitude of business. And what that means basically, I looked up the word business there in the Strong's Concordance, and it's where it says business, it means, it can also mean travail, thinking deeply or being worried about certain things. That can also lead you to have dreams. Excuse me. If you are worrying a lot about certain things, you tend to have dreams about those very things that you're worried about. So what could have been actually happening in chapter 2 of Daniel is that, and it has been said by some Christians that Nebuchadnezzar was probably worried about his kingdom, especially what would happen to his kingdom after he died. So God sent him, or made him have this dream to explain to him what not only what would happen, but also to show that God is in control of everything that goes on this earth. Because remember, I said that the Nebuchadnezzar was a real king. He wanted to be in control, and he was probably worried about what would happen after he left, after he died, because he wouldn't be in control at that time. So anyway, verse 31 goes on to say, this is Daniel now speaking, "Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet of iron, and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out with hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king." And then jumping on to verse 38, and wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Very last sentence of verse 38, "Thou art this head of gold." So Daniel explained there very clearly to King Nebuchadnezzar that, well, not only told him what the dream was that he basically had a dream of a metal man who was made up of a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, his belly, chest and arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and clay. So this is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. But what did it mean? It meant that Babylon, or Nebuchadnezzar himself, who represented Babylon, was the head of gold in this metal man, in this image of this metal man. And then after that, there'll come another kingdom, which would be, gold is, out of all the metals that are shown in the dream, the head of gold was the one that had more value, because it was obviously made of gold. And after that, there'll be a kingdom that would be represented by silver, and then after that, brass, after that iron, and then after that feet made up of iron and clay. So for those who have read their histories, you know that after Babylon came Medo-Persia. Medo-Persia conquered Babylon, so that's the kingdom that's represented there. And then after that, it was the Greeks, and there were some wars that were fought between the Greeks and the Medo-Persians, and then the Greeks were conquered by the Romans, by the Roman Empire. And that's why the New Testament was written in Greek, because the Greeks had an influence even in Palestine or Israel. So that's what the dream and the interpretation of it was. But I've actually already done a video where I explained Daniel chapter 2, but maybe not in so much detail. there's kind of like a misunderstanding of Daniel chapter 2, especially the end part of the dream of the dream that was shown to Nebuchadnezzar and to Daniel. There are many Christians who say that, you know, if we go down to the feet of this statue of this metal man, then many Christians, when interpreting this dream, will say that the toes on the feet of this metal man, they represent Europe. You know, but that's not correct. That's a misunderstanding of that prophecy. Yes, we you know there are two legs which are made up of iron. We know that that's those that represent the Western and the Eastern Roman Eastern Rome and Western Rome. Um, but then when you go down to the feet, the iron is mixed with clay. What does that really mean? You know, it's actually talking about church and state, and it's talking about weak nations and strong nations. For maybe in today's language, would say first world countries and third world countries mixed together. It's talking about the new world order basically, and how, you know, you can't mix iron with clay. That uh, the new world order is going to be weak, but it's also church and state, you know, because that's what the Catholic Church church system is. It's made up of church and state. That's why on the Vatican flag you see two keys. So why do I believe that it's talking about the New World Order and not Europe necessarily? Because if we jump forward to Daniel chapter 7, and I'll be covering Daniel chapter 7 in its own video. In Daniel chapter 7, we read of a beast, you know, that Daniel couldn't really give a name to. You know, he could only describe it. Whereas the other beast that came before this, the fourth beast, you could say this was a lion, this was a leopard with wings, or a lion with eagle's wings and a leopard with wings. You could say all that, but then and obviously there was a bear as well. But when it came to the fourth beast, he said he couldn't really say what that kind of animal was. But on the head of this beast were 10 horns, and there was another horn, so an 11th horn that came up. And as that horn was coming up, it uprooted 3 horns. So once again, if we go back to history, we'll find that the Roman Empire was basically divided into 10 kingdoms, and as the papacy, which is that little horn that came up after the 10 horns already there, as the little horn, the papacy, was coming up, it uprooted 3 horns, and those horns were represented the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths that don't exist today. So the 10 toes are not representing the divided nations of Europe, you know, the ones that split up after the Roman Empire disintegrated. It's not talking about that, because if, you know, 10 minus 3 is 7, so the 10 toes can't be talking about that, because we see that this stone, which represents God's kingdom, which is written about in verse 34, Daniel 2:34 says, "Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and break them to pieces." When the stone comes and hits the statue, it's basically the stone hits the statue when let me just have a look at that verse again. It's exactly here. It says, kind of the midway through verse 34, this stone, it says, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay. So this stone, which represents God's kingdom, destroys the image by hitting the feet, because you know, God's kingdom is going to be established at a time when the new world order has been set up. It's not before that. You know, so that there will be the 10 toes represent the new world order, and it's not talking about about Europe. It's not talking about the divided nations of Europe, because God is concerned about the whole world, not just about Europe. I mean, to say that the 10 toes represent Europe is kind of like it's like saying that God is only concerned about European nations. God is concerned about the whole world, which do make up the New World Order. But remember, I said that the Heruli and the Vandals and the Ostrogoths were destroyed. So here we have 10 toes. So knowing that 10 minus 3 is 7, it cannot be talking about about Europe. And also, besides that, like I said in my video where I explained about Daniel chapter 2 and the misunderstanding about the 10 toes, is that we now have a European Union in which there are, I believe there are 27 countries, especially since Britain left the European Union through Brexit. But that's on paper. We don't know what's going on behind the curtain. They might still be part of the EU in some way. But I think there are about 27 or 28 countries, and here we have 10 toes. So it's kind of like doesn't add up. So another verse that I want to read before I forget, it's actually very important. So here, if we go to Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, it says, "And in the days of these kings," yeah, the kings that make up the 10 toes on the statue. "In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." So it can be talking about Europe, because we know that the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths were destroyed. So that leaves 7 nations in Europe, not 10. This is talking about the New World Order. I hope I've made that clear. So yeah, we have to let God's word interpret itself. We shouldn't uh, take things that are external to God's word to explain God's word. It doesn't work like that. So what did the king do? What did Nebuchadnezzar do when Daniel explained the? Let me just move from the shadow here. When Daniel explained, not only told the king what he had dreamt, but what the interpretation of the dream was. Verse 47, the king answered unto Daniel and said, "Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldest reveal this secret." So this is what Daniel had been trying to do all along. You're trying to show the king that there's actually only one true God, and that God is in heaven. He's the one who created everything. I suppose what could have been happening in Nebuchadnezzar's mind is that because Babylon had conquered the Judah, which was the only tribe that was left when Babylon conquered it, with Israel having been taken captive and being taken captive to other countries by the Assyrians, and the Syrians. Perhaps Nebuchadnezzar thought that the nation of Judah can't be they can't be God's people because they have been conquered. That was kind of the thinking those days, that if remember that when the Assyrians went and basically threatened those in Jerusalem, they said, don't think that your God is going to help you, because look at what the king of the Assyrians has done to the other nations. Your God is not going to help you. And obviously the other tribes of Israel had been taken captive and they'd been conquered. So it was thought that when a nation was conquered, God was not with them. But no, God had allowed Judah to be conquered because they were in rebellion to him. And he basically wanted to teach them a lesson. So, and it says, especially in the book of Jeremiah, that God actually used the nation of Babylon as an instrument to punish the nation of Judah, those that were left of Israel. Then the king made, verse 48, then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and the chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Which, once again, that's, I kind of already mentioned it earlier, that maybe this actually caused jealousy with the other governors and the wise men, because you have to remember that Daniel had been taken to Babylon as a captive from Judah, along with all the other the young men of his age. And then him being given such a position could have caused jealousy, which it actually did cause jealousy, as we shall see later in the other chapters that follow. Last verse. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So Daniel wasn't selfish. He also considered his friends who had prayed with him, so that God could reveal the dream to him, that they should also be given positions by King Nebuchadnezzar. Now we shall see that although Daniel was trying to witness, that's what we would say today. He was trying to witness to the king, so that he would know that the only true God is the one in heaven, and that he basically should worship him and reverence him. Nebuchadnezzar actually kind of rebelled, even though God had revealed to him the things that were troubling him and what the answers were to that. He rebelled against this, because in Daniel chapter 3, which I'm going to cover in the coming days, that he built this this statue of gold and tried to get everyone to worship him. But I won't say too much about that, because I want to talk about that in another video where I'll talk about Daniel chapter 3. But yeah, so the most important things to remember is God knows the future, and he basically already has revealed the future through dreams, but also through symbolic language. And just before something else before I end the video is the 10 toes on the statue. Yeah, not only do they represent the New World Order, but the New World Order actually, the structure of the New World Order in terms of how the world is going to be governed has already been set up. Because in 1973, the Club of Rome, we know that the kingdom that is ruling Earth right now is pagan Rome, because not pagan Rome, sorry, papal Rome, because pagan Rome basically changed and became papal Rome. They put on a Christian garb. So we know that they are the ones who are pulling the strings. But they have, this is what I wanted to say, I almost forgot, but they have what I call front organizations, because they try and hide, so that the ordinary person won't see. That's why you have so many people saying, oh, it's the Masons that are pulling the strings. Or some will say there's a very large group nowadays who are saying that it's the Jews. No, the Jews are basically the tail on the dog, whereas the papacy is the head. That's why even F. Tapasosi in his book Rulers of Evil made it very clear that the Rothschilds who claim to be Jews, but they are European. They are not really Jews. Jews are from the Middle East, and Jesus wasn't white, by the way. That F. Tapasosi said that they are the Rothschilds are the guardians or keepers of the Vatican treasury. The Jews work for the papacy. They are not really in control as such. It's made to look that way so that those who don't who don't read their Bibles properly will think that it's the Jews that are controlling this, but it's not. It's made very clear that excuse me. So we have the legs in Daniel chapter 2 are made of iron, and iron represents Rome. As we go down to the feet, we see that the iron is then mixed with clay. There are still elements of Rome in there. And then when we get to Daniel chapter 7, I will try and make it more clear that it's the papacy that's ruling. Okay, that's why we have that little horn that came up and uprooted 3 kingdoms. So yeah, it's not the Jews that are running things, it's the papacy. And God is allowing that. Ultimately, God is the one in control, okay? So, yeah, so Daniel chapter 2, verse 44 of Daniel chapter 2 makes it very clear that in the days of the 10 toes, God shall set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. It can't be talking about Europe, because the Hulai, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths have already been destroyed, leaving 7 nations in Europe. So, yeah, I know I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make it very clear that that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the New World Order. So, yeah. I hope that makes things clear, because sometimes what tends to happen sometimes as Christians is that we tend to believe whatever our denominations teach, or whatever the pastor is teaching. That's not Christianity. Christianity is about following the Bible and letting the Bible interpret itself, and always seeking for truth, more truth, not thinking that you know everything. So yeah, I don't want to go any further. I'll just end the video here, and I'll see you on the next video.